In the last tutorial we covered switch statements, like the if statement, the embedded if statement, if-else statements, and the switch statement. Now, what that does is that makes your program seem very intelligent by giving it options or checking for conditions or options. You know, if this, do this. So what we're going to talk about now is looping. What looping is it's sort of the power behind programming. It allows you to repeat a block of code. So the first loop we're going to talk about is the while loop. Now, the way a while loop looks is it looks sort of just like an if statement, but it says while. So you'd write the word while, open close parentheses, and then you would write some sort of statement. So console, debug. I'm so used to doing Visual C#, .log, open close parentheses, I am looping. But right now we don't know, we're not testing anything to loop. So we can say while, let's go ahead and create an integer called number. While number is equal to 5. So this is, we just created a variable, and this variable is a number and it's holding 5. So what we can say is while number, which again is holding the number 5, is greater than 1, loop. Now the problem with this is if I was to save the code right now, it would actually loop forever, because number is greater than 5, so it would just keep going and going and going until either the program crashed or your computer's memory would get full. So we have to sort of create smart loops, and one way of doing that is instead of putting a 1 here, creating another variable. So let's just call this variable another integer. We'll call this number2. And let's make this equal to 1. So I'm going to go ahead and call this number2. So what we're saying here is while number 1, let's go ahead and make this 1 and make this 1 just to kind of make it clear. While number 1, which is 5, is greater than number 2, loop this. Well, we're still going to run into the same problem. This loop is going to run forever. So what we want to do is we want to sort of figure out a way to increase the value located in number 2. So one way of doing that is we can simply write number 2 equals number 2 plus 1. So let's go ahead and do another debug in here, and let's print out what number 2 is storing so we can see how our loop works. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and hit Control S, and let's make sure our console window is open here. And let's do that one more time. There we go. Let's press play. So let's take a look at our code here. Now this only runs once. So while number 1 is greater than number 2, number 2 equals number 2 plus 1. Now there's a couple things going on here. Let's go ahead and enclose this in brackets. So like I said, there's a couple things going on here. So let's go ahead and save this and press play again so we can kind of see our output. Okay. So what's happening is this. And let's stop this so we can start from the top. Okay. You can see here that the first thing it does is it checks whether number 1 is greater than number 2, and it is. And then we add 1 to number 2. Notice that the very first thing it does is it prints out a 2 here, and then it goes through, it says I'm looping, then again it spits out whatever was saved in here, and it continuously loops until number 2 is holding the value 5. So that's one way of continuously looping this. So and again, if we were to remove this value, it would never stop looping until it filled our computer memory. So this is one type of loop. It's called a while loop. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and delete this for now. And I'm going to talk about another kind of loop called a for loop. Now the for loop looks something like this. For, well, you don't have caps lock on, sorry about that. For open close parentheses, open curly brace, close curly brace. And in here, a for loop has 3 conditions, okay, or 3 properties rather. The first one, we can actually initialize a variable. So we can say, and again, remember variables are able to be written over, so we'll say number 1 here equals 0. So number 1 no longer stores 5, it just equals 0. Okay? And what we can say, as long as, or we'll do number 2 because it equals 1. As long as number 2, so here number 2 is now initialized to 0. As long as number 2 is less than number 1, can I get this more on the screen? Just like we did before, we can increment number 2. So instead of typing number 2 equals number 2 plus, there's two operators called the increment and decrement operator. So it'll actually add 1 to number 2. So all you have to do is do plus plus and the name of your variable. And again, what this operator does is it adds 1 to number 2. So every time it runs through this loop, it's only going to run this condition once. So you can see here number 2 equals 0. As it runs through the loop again, it only runs these 2 conditions. It checks whether number 2 is still less than number 1, and if that's the case, it'll add a number to number 2, and then it'll run whatever is located in here. So let's just type for now debug again, debug.log. And we're going to go ahead and spit out, no parentheses, we're going to go ahead and write number 2. Alright, let's go ahead and save this. And let's press play and see what our output is. Now, you can see here that it doesn't increment until after the it's run through the loop once. So for example, number 2 equals 0. Is number 2 less than number 1? Yes, because number 2 equals 0. It doesn't run this until after it's gone through the loop. So first thing it does is it prints out 0, which is what it's currently holding. Then it runs through again. It goes to 1, 2, 3, 4, and then eventually number 2 reaches the number 5. And is 5 less than 5? No, so it doesn't run this any longer. That's why it stops at 4. And that's the body behind a for loop. Okay, so let's take a look at another type of loop. It's called the do-while loop. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and delete my for loop and these variables, and we're going to try something new. Well, let's go ahead and enter a new data type called char, which is the character data type. And we're going to name this response. Or let's do we'll do response. Okay. And we'll make response equal to yes. Alright, let's make sure that we put that inside of a there we go, inside a single quote. Alright, so the body of a do while loop is you say do, open close parentheses, oops, and you say while, we could say response is the same as, let's make this a capital, well we'll just do lowercase y, it's fine. So let's say n for no. Okay? So we just want to debug .log. So we can say response is yes or no. So when I hit Control S and I press play, I want to show you something. Here, looks like I'm missing a semicolon at the end. Here we go. Yeah, I'm missing the semicolon here. Okay, so take a look at this. So we have a variable called response, and it holds characters, single characters. So what we want to do is we want to do this while response is equal to no. But what you're going to find interesting is the do while loop runs this regardless of the while loop. So let's take a look so we can kind of get a better idea of what it's doing. Okay. Notice that response is not equal to no, or not the same as no. The response is equal to yes. So it's going to do this at least once. It will not loop unless this condition is correct. So let's go ahead and make this a y. Let's hit Control S and let's press play. See what happens. And again, this is a never-ending loop, so hopefully it actually plays through. It doesn't crash it. Okay, it looks like it's going to crash Unity. The reason is, while response is the same as yes, I want to continuously loop this. What would be better in the long run is you want to increment or decrement a variable so that it's continuously checking if response is less than or equal to some sort of number. But I sort of wanted to show you how you can kind of create a never-ending loop, or how to avoid them. So that's a brief introduction on looping.